And we're live. Oh, you're supposed to say that.
Looks like we're live. Are we live? All right, welcome to the Ramsey Dewey podcast, episode number 17, with special guest Angelo Ferrer, all the way from Japan, and came from Japan to visit me here in Shanghai. Now, Angelo is a Kajukenbo practitioner. That's like a tongue twister to say rapidly. Kajukenbo practitioner.
Try that 5 times fast.
I know, man. And let's see, I'm just going to adjust the camera ever so slightly. I don't know if that made a big difference, but here we are. Podcast number 17. It looks like we got somebody watching.
Yeah.
So as opposed to the Q&As where I go live and I do Q&As and I take a bunch of questions from the viewers, because of the setup we're using, we're not going to be able to see your question, at least not very well. So, yeah. But we're live. So, Angelo, Japan, this is your second time in Shanghai, is that correct?
That's my second time in Shanghai.
Yeah. So some time ago, Angelo, he stopped by my gym, and you didn't hear about me from YouTube, which was interesting.
No.
A lot of guys who come from outside of China, they hear about me on YouTube, they watch my channel, they think it's cool or whatever, and they come and train with me. And you did not. How did you hear about my gym?
I heard about your gym because I was trying to find an MMA gym in China. And I searched Google search, and just a few random places, maybe 3 or 4 places came up.
Yeah.
And I wasn't even planning on coming to Shanghai. I just wanted to go to China to do specifically MMA.
Yeah.
And when I looked up online, I found the JX Fight Club, and I found your email, shot you an email. I actually emailed the 4 other gyms, but they never contacted me back. So I figured
Interesting.
I wasn't about to shoot over to another country that I've never been to and gamble on whether or not they were going to let you in. So.
Yeah, that makes sense, man. That makes sense. So yeah, we man, that was a good time sitting together.
Yeah,
You were training for a fight, correct? Like
I was training for an
fight?
amateur MMA fight. Yeah.
Yeah, we actually made a YouTube video. You can watch that on the channel about training with very specific restrictions, which is something I think is really important, not just for amateur MMA fighters, but anybody, to give yourself limitations when you train, because it forces you to get creative, to think outside of the box, and to really refine very specific techniques. So, how's the MMA scene in Japan right now?
Well, the MMA scene in Japan is really big in Tokyo, specifically Tokyo. And I say really big, I should probably specify big amongst the martial arts community.
Yeah.
But not big in the public eye.
Okay.
So, the average person in Japan right now, which is it's going to be shocking, and I'm sure maybe some people are going to disagree and be like, no, they do not know what MMA is.
Yeah.
If I just grabbed a random person off the street, said, hey, did you watch the fight last week on the UFC? Or do you know not even last week, let's just say, have you heard the UFC?
Yeah.
And 9 times out of 10, unless the person does martial arts, will say, what are you talking about? What is that?
Yeah, I think it's a really similar situation here in China. Like, man, I was calling some fights for a Kunlun fight. It's mostly kickboxing, but they also do MMA. And there was a fight with a guy named Zhang Jipeng, who is he's a really good fighter. He's one of the more experienced old school MMA fighters who's still competing in China. And he was fighting a Russian guy, and Russian guy got a takedown. And just to set the context for this story, when I first got here to China, when I started competing, there were crowds of tens of thousands of people at these stadiums. Like, my first fight was in front of 40,000 people in China. And it was dead silence. Silent. I'd heard of this sort of thing happening in fight shows in Asia, but I didn't really understand it until I witnessed it firsthand. Like, dead silence until the Chinese guy did something cool. Then they went, ah, and they went nuts. But if I ever did anything cool, no, dead silence. But usually what they would cheer for is the big kicks, the punches, the takedowns, the throws, that type of thing that they're used to seeing in Sunda. But in this fight with Zhang Jipeng, and so he ends up on his back. He pulls guard, and then he starts working to rubber guard, and he gets into mission control position. And as soon as he gets to the mission control position, the audience goes nuts. They start cheering like, ah! And I realized, wait a minute, they know what this is. They recognize this is an advancement of position, however slight. And then he started working through the progressions of the rubber guard, and as he did, the audience started going nuts, like, ah, he's doing it, he's doing it. And as I'm commentating, I'm like, man, how would Eddie Bravo feel knowing this, that the people, the fight fans of China recognize his system, the intricacies of his system, and they recognize the advancement of the progressions throughout all of this. And he managed to set up a triangle choke. And, he's going through, and there are some really subtle movements, which a casual fan would not understand, to finish the triangle choke. And as he's going through the progressions to finish the choke, the audience cheers for each one. I'm like, this is unbelievable. 10 years ago, I would never have imagined that the fans would be this well educated on grappling. And yet here we are now. But again, the average person in China, no idea what MMA is, no idea what the UFC is. But the fans that exist here, oh man, they are super fans. So is it something like that in Japan?
It's something like that. Like the people that do follow, well, I don't even want to. Okay, they do understand grappling, obviously, right? It's the home of judo, right? It's the birthplace of judo. So they do
karate
understand
and the samurai and
karate
jiu-jitsu and all this other cool stuff.
Yeah. So they do understand that. They understand. Well, the people that watch it, understand MMA and what it is, the moves. They understand submissions. They understand escaping. They understand switching and getting better control, how to gain a better position by going into full mount. And they understand the idea that if you take full mount, the person's winning, or if the person escapes out of closed guard, they're getting somewhere. They understand all these things.
Yeah.
But who they follow is completely different. I've heard a lot of the people that are at my MMA club out in Kobe. Shout out to KFN. They usually talk about how they. If I ask them, "What's the last fight you watched?" Most of them don't watch the UFC. They watch what is that? Risen.
Okay, yeah.
Did I say that right? Risen.
I've always wondered about how that's pronounced.
Raisin.
I imagine
not
the
Raisin.
Japanese probably say it a little bit differently.
But yeah, they follow that promotion, like really big. That promotion, because a lot of Japanese MMA fighters are fighting for that promotion, so they're kind of following their fighters. So they tend to follow more Risen than they do UFC.
Okay, yeah.
So I'm always being asked, "Did you catch the last Risen fight?" Whenever I walk into not just the MMA club, but I also I cross train with a Gracie program out there, the Gracie Barra program out there, and they always ask the same thing. They're always keeping up with the Risen fights, and I'm not, so I don't know half the time.
Yeah, that is interesting. So the UFC isn't really what they're talking about over there.
No,
Fascinating.
No. And then amongst the local community, then it gets even more localized. Like I'm from Kansai. In Kansai, which is near Osaka, the bigger fight promotions or local promotions are going to be War Dog and Deep Impact.
Yeah.
And Deep is more from Tokyo and War Dog is more from Kansai. They'll have a giant tournament where they kind of pit fighters from the Kansai area and the Kanto area, as they call it. Yeah. And they'll determine who's the national champion. But again, this is all local. I still have no idea where they televise it. I fought for War Dog when I had my first fight out there, and I still have no idea where they even televised it. Like I think flipping through the channels, I did see Deep, and I know they cross promote. I came across a fighting channel that shows kickboxing, mostly kickboxing and some boxing, and then once in a while MMA. Yeah. So yeah, they follow if they follow it. The ones that follow those promotions, and there's not a lot of people like. I've been watching it for a while now, just to get an idea of who's fighting in their promotions. There's another promotion called Hybrid Pancreas.
Okay.
And originally, I guess back in the day, these are the same people that were connected to Pride, and a lot of the Pankration matches that were the old Pankration matches with
Boss Rutan.
yes, Boss Rutan. There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, Boss Rutan. That was the same promotion company that he fought for back in the day. Is now called Hybrid Pankration, and they'll do MMA slash grappling.
Is it the same old Pankration rules with open hands and no gloves?
No, they changed it.
Or is
So now the rules are, they have 3 divisions, and
Okay.
it's interesting. Their A class is MMA. It's
Okay.
just MMA rules
All right.
Same-
MMA, but called Pankration. Makes
called
sense.
Pankration. The B class has Pankration rules, but they don't televise those. So the way it works is if you want to be, they've moved more towards MMA.
Yeah.
And maybe there is, and again, maybe someone's going to come on right now and be like, no, they still have Pankration matches. And maybe they do. Okay, maybe they do. I'm not an
I've
expert.
heard that term get thrown around a lot, like Pankration even being used for just straight up grappling matches with no striking,
Yeah,
which
yeah. In America, I
doesn't make any sense to me.
Camp Pendleton in Oceanside. I'm originally from California. They used to have Pankration tournaments where they would allow striking to the body.
Yeah.
And it was, yeah. So either way, going back to your question, in Japan, Class B is allowing essentially grappling, but then it looked a little like Pankration, but we're still closed fist, not open. They told us recently, they said they don't want us to do open hand because of the fingers and eye pokes. So recently they made a new rule, like this happened last year. For that, you were still allowed to have open hand and kind of come in. You can close or open your hand. But then this year they said no. I guess too many eye
Yeah,
pokes.
that's my biggest concern about doing open-handed sparring. Just on request from viewers, we did some open-handed sparring. We made a video about it at the gym, and man, I got poked and scratched and all over the face, man. Fingernails, and
Yeah.
it's a mess, man. It's a mess. It's not like painful immediately, but afterward, man, if you're gonna spar at the gym, you don't want to go home all scratched up and bleeding.
Yeah, and just an eye poke. Just an
Yeah.
eye poke. Oh my. I was teaching one of my students how to just parry, right? We're working
Yeah.
on a simple lead parry into a straight. And I told him, be careful though, because you're going to be, he wanted to fight for the same venue. And
Yeah.
if they see you do this, they'll stop you. If they see you do this, it's okay. But they specifically said this. Make sure your fingers are closed. If they see your fingers open, if you parry with like an open hand like that, just relax, they'll stop you right away. And I used to think that was kind of bullshit. But while sparring with him, sure enough, he comes in and he tries to parry my hand, and it just slipped over with the MMA glove, and he got his finger into my right eye.
Yeah.
And for like maybe 10 seconds, I couldn't see anything. And I was wondering, like, this could be it. This could be the one. I'll have to wear an eye patch from now on. It'll
have
look
to be a
pretty.
pirate,
It'll
man.
look pretty cool, but it's gonna really suck.
Oh man, I was wearing an eye patch for about 2 weeks after my last fight, which actually left me partially blind in one eye. It was, man, that was an ordeal. And I remember I got a lot of comments saying, "Hey, it's Sagat from Street Fighter 2. Look at him." So, yeah, that was an experience. So, one more question about Japan here. Now, when Japanese fighters come to China, because there's so much nationalism in China, and there's a lot of people still harbor so much resentment because of World War II and the Japanese involvement in Chinese history. And so, because of that, there's all this outrage, public outrage that is projected onto Japanese fighters. And so when they come over here, when the Japanese fight, if the Japanese fighter starts losing, the crowd goes nuts. They cheer like nothing I've ever heard before. Like, ah! They're just calling for blood. It's nuts. So, I don't know how common it is for a Chinese fighter to fight in Japan. Have you seen this? Is there
They do come out. I've
is
seen
there
them.
any public response to that type of fight that is different than any other type of fight?
It's hard to tell. Again, like from what I've followed, I know there's a lot of Chinese fighters in Risen, right?
Yeah.
From what I've seen, and they do pit up Japanese fighters against Chinese fighters. But the thing is that it's, I mean, like I said, I don't know where. I know they hold those events sometimes in Japan, and sometimes they
Ah.
hold them elsewhere, right? Like they're held all across Southeast Asia, if I'm not mistaken. The Risen promotion, right? So, from what I've seen, it's the same as any other fight. They don't really. Japan has. They are nationalistic. They do support things like their Olympics and that kind of stuff. So
Sure.
like, of course, for judo and everything else, they do go wild for their fighters.
Yeah.
I will say that they do go wild for their fighters. Um,
But there's no like one country that's a public scapegoat for.
Not really. Everyone's just kind of a foreigner. So like,
Okay.
everyone, if there's any a classification, they kind of view everyone as a foreigner, anybody outside of Japan.
Yeah.
And there is more of a, not so much in the cage, not so much in the cage, but outside of the cage, there is resentment towards Chinese people.
Okay.
As far as like, not for fighting though. Once you're fighting, they're gonna treat a Chinese fighter as a Russian fighter as any other fighter. Like once you're in the cage, it's all based. Of course, they're gonna root for their Japanese fighter because they're always gonna root for their Japanese fighter. But
Yeah.
at the same time, they're not exactly, they're not exactly gonna boo or anything. If
Yeah.
and they're already very quiet. Same thing as far as being quiet. It's one of the few places like if you go to a concert, even a music concert, dead silence.
Yeah.
The musician's playing.
They're just there to listen.
He'll talk to the crowd, and especially if they're a foreigner, like, "How's everyone doing tonight?" And everyone's like, and it kind of weirds them out. Like, I have a friend who's a professional musician, and he told me he's like, I wasn't sure. Like our first song, I wasn't sure if they hated us, and I was wondering what our promoters had us doing out there. And then after we finished, they all clapped and everyone went wild. But they're like
Yeah.
they were like that. So for the fights, same deal, really quiet, and the only yelling you're gonna hear is from the coaches and the corners. Like, get him, get him. It's always the coaches in the corners that are yelling. It's never the crowd. The crowd is usually just silent on both
Okay.
ends. On both ends of the fight, they just,
Wow.
unless they know the fighter,
Even if there's like some big thing like a giant takedown or a knockout or whatever.
mostly quiet. Maybe you'll hear like a oh, but it's like again, then back to silence. Like,
Oh, interesting.
they're not very loud.
Japanese culture is so interesting in the fact that it's so radically different from the West. Like I would say, even Chinese culture is much more like American culture than what I understand of Japanese culture.
Yeah, and again, I'm only speaking from my own personal experience. Maybe if I haven't been to a big venue out in Japan, maybe it's different at the big venues.
Yeah,
But I know from the smaller venues I've been to that had about 1,000 people or so, that was the thing that weirded me out the most was, like when they have the walkout music. You play the walkout music and everyone's
yeah.
as your fighter walks out. The walkout music plays and there's silence. And
That's
like,
amazing.
and I'm glad I heard it first. I thought I heard it before I walked out for my walkout music, but I'm like, am I at the wrong?
It's
Am I on the
unnerving,
wrong?
isn't
Am
it?
I on the wrong door? Like maybe I'm standing at the wrong door because like I don't hear anybody in that room. Maybe.
Yeah.
And sure enough, they open the doors, music's playing.
Yeah, it is absolutely unnerving coming from the United States, like fighting in the U.S. Like when I was fighting in the U.S., I fought in these small venues like clubs and bars and things like that. They would set up the cage in there, and that's where they would have the fights. And even though it was a small crowd of maybe a couple hundred people, it was loud and it was rowdy and it was raucous, and you'd hear people screaming, "Punch him in the face! Kick him in the head! What are you doing, you bum? Boo! Yay!" Just all of that stuff going on. And 40,000 people in a stadium in China, dead silence. You could hear a pin drop, and man,
It's weird.
more than anything else took the momentum out of me. Like, where's the noise? Where's the noise? This is weird. I'm on another planet. This is the Twilight Zone. So, man. So you are a practitioner of Kajukenbo, and I'm sure a bunch of folks watching this, reading the title all about Kajukenbo, are wondering, they're talking about
Well,
Japan.
and
Come on.
fighting. Yeah, where's the Kajukenbo?
Where's the Kajukenbo? So let's talk about that a little bit. For those who don't know, what is Kajukenbo?
Yeah. I don't even know what it is. No, I'm just kidding. Just joking. Okay. So, Kajukenbo started in the late 40s in Hawaii. As the story goes, and there's many stories, and I do encourage all your listeners to Wikipedia search Kajukenbo. And it's going to have many of the things that I'm going to mention. But just a quick cliff notes, the history. In the late 1940s and the 50s, there was essentially a club that had a guy who was teaching karate, and I'm not gonna mention names because I'm bad at names, so I'm gonna try to avoid the discrepancies. And for any Kajukenbo listeners, I'm sorry. Okay, you can feel free to share more of the names. I'm really bad at that, and rather than saying the wrong name, I'm just gonna keep it a basic story.
That's probably smart. I did this video about Aikido once, and I couldn't remember the name of Morihei Ueshiba, or however you say his name, the founder of Aikido, and people got so mad, like,
Yeah.
how dare you not remember his name? I'm like,
Yeah,
I don't even practice Aikido, leave me alone.
yeah. And
Anyway,
yeah, and there's always there's a few names that I'm supposed to always mention. Like, well, the founder is named Seijo Imperato, Adriano Imperato,
okay.
and he's Hawaiian. And then and his brother Joe Imperato. These are people that are big. These are the founders. And as the story goes, Kajukenbo is an acronym. It's Ka for karate, Ju for judo and jujitsu, Ken for Kenpo, and Kenpo, not the Japanese Kenpo, but more meaning the style for the Kung Fu, because it has to do with the way they
Chinese Kenpo.
Chinese Kenpo. So they were looking more the Kenpo comes from the idea that they want to incorporate Kung Fu techniques, Chinese techniques. So that's what the acronym is supposed to stand for. More of a philosophy, not so much of a traditional style. And then the bow is boxing.
Ah, interesting.
Kajukenbo. Right? Yeah. So they encourage their students to mix. And each school will have a different approach to this, which is why if you come from a Kajukenbo school, let's say you came from a Kajukenbo school in Spain, because they're in Spain, and you came from a Kajukenbo school in California, which is where I'm from, it may look very different. The training may look very different even, because Kajukenbo practitioners allow their black belts to teach however they want. They don't say you have to teach what I showed you. And if you listen to I'm going to mention him, probably going to say his name wrong too, John Hackleman, who started Hawaiian Kenpo, which is a total other part of the history. We'll get to that later.
Yeah.
He talks about how when he was training, he hated forms. And he'd always say, I hate this shit. And his instructor would go in and be like, well, you do what the fuck I tell you, and then when you get your black belt, you can do whatever the fuck you want. And he did. And he did. So that's how they are, though. It's very much, once you get your black belt, you can do whatever you like.
Is there a syllabus of movement and a set of forms in Kajukenbo?
Each school has a take on their movements and forms. So there is forms, but each school will have a different take on that. So, for example, my school comes from the Abad method, and they have these forms called palamas. And palamas, nothing, it's no secret or like some sort of Chinese or Japanese acronym. Palama is the settlement that Kajukenbo originated back in Hawaii. It was called the Palama Settlement. It's the name of the first school that was founded at a rec center there.
Okay.
So we have these sets called Palamas 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I think they go up to 10, but in our school we have 5. And the other schools have this thing called Pinon. They called it something else. But I cross-checked, and there's some similar movements between the two. So there is forms. That's part of the curriculum's forms.
Okay.
So going back to the history, what happened was Adriano Imperato was a pro boxer. And he started learning karate and judo with the people at the rec center. As the story goes, there might be some holes in here, and for you Kajukenbo listeners, again, feel free, go on the Wikipedia page, you can correct it as you
angry
go.
Comments down below.
Down below, feel free.
Tell Angelo how wrong he is.
Yes, and I'm wrong all the time. My wife always reminds me of that. So we have the concept was they had karate, judo, and there was a Chinese style, and I forgot what the name of the Chinese style of kung fu, but there was a kung fu instructor there too. And these 3 guys got together and taught the boxer. And then when they taught the boxer and they got him through the levels, the high rankings of all 3 styles, they said, well, this person is no longer he's not necessarily judo, and he's not necessarily your kung fu style, and he's not necessarily karate. He's doing takedowns into ground and pounds. And they wanted to develop a style for the streets.
For the streets.
For the streets.
Cue the music. For the streets. Okay.
They wanted to develop a style specifically to be able to fight military that were at the Navy bases, because the locals were always getting into bar fights with the local Navy guys.
Yeah.
So they wanted to develop a fighting style to fight in bars. So, for the streets. So that's one of the things that they're always talking about. This style is
Yeah,
developed.
people are always asking me in the comments, is such and such a fighting style good for the streets? Is Taekwondo good for the streets? Is Judo good for the streets? I'm like, no, street fights are not good.
They're not.
They're just not good.
And I think this is a good segue into the story that we're about to go into.
Yeah, okay.
So, as I mentioned, Seijo was the founder, and his brother Joe. Now, there's some arguments that Joe and Seijo kind of founded Kajukenbo together, and they both have similar backgrounds. They're both boxers that started learning karate, judo, and kung fu. And as their schools started to grow and their students started to grow, Joe, he went to a bar, because again, we said it's for the streets. It's designed for the streets. And he went to a bar with one of his students. And one of his students kind of caught the, what's the word I'm looking for here? The stink eye.
Yeah.
Got the stink eye from another guy at the bar.
I think he might have been looking for a fight on purpose.
Yeah, like one of those deals. And the other guy that he gave the stink eye to, he started kind of eyeballing him. And they exchanged back and forth. So Joe, being his instructor, kind of stepped in and said, "Hey, we're not here for that. We're all locals. We're all Hawaiian here. Let's just shake hands and call it a day. Let it go. No reason to be fighting."
Yeah.
So they shook hands, and they split ways. And when they got out of the bar later that night, the guy that he was eyeing was there with two other guys in the parking lot waiting for them. And they immediately, back his student.
Forgot that vicious eyeing.
No, the vicious eye. He wasn't gonna let it go.
That browbeating.
Yeah. And I guess, the student didn't want to back down at this point, so they started scrapping. And Hawaiians, if you've ever been to Hawaii, Hawaiians have a really big fighting culture that's really big out there. And they call it scrapping. You like to scrap? You like to scrap.
And a lot of Hawaiians are really big.
Yeah.
I had a friend from Hawaii that I used to spar with from time to time back in the U.S., and it was not very fun sparring with him. He would go light. He would hold back, and I could tell he was holding back so much, and he was still knocking me on the floor, practically knocking me out with every strike because he was just so big.
Yeah, they're big guys, and they know how to fight. They like to fight. It's something they like to do. So they ended up going at it. Joe was able to take down all three guys, him and the other guy. They fought them all off. Their odds were a little bit off. And then, and all this information, if you want to look into it, the Kajukenbo Connection by David Tavares. He's got a really good book about this.
Okay.
So he ends up in the corner. Joe ends up in the corner between two cars and one of the guys. And according to the police reports, one of the guys says he poked me. He heard he poked me, and he gets up. Joe gets up, and he was stabbed. The other guy ran off. His student ran off to get the police, and eventually everyone kind of just dispersed because the cops were coming. And Joe felt he was okay. They asked him, "Are you okay?" He said, "I got stabbed, and but I'm okay. It was just a scratch.
Just a scratch.
Just a scratch. Just a scratch." Right? Monty Python. Right? And he decided to go home because he felt that the injuries weren't fatal. And they proved out they were, and he ended up bleeding out throughout the night. He did.
Yeah, let that be a lesson to you folks who are getting into so many street fights on the internet.
Yeah.
When you get stabbed, seek medical attention.
Yeah. Seek medical attention. Or even better, try not to get stabbed.
Yeah. Two very important lessons we can already learn from Kajukenbo.
Yeah. Try not to get stabbed. Yeah, so after that, there's this thing that they do in Kajukenbo that whenever we do our line basics, we always look behind us. The idea that someone might sneak attack you. Like, okay, cool.
And we're back, I think. Sorry about that. Again, this is my first live podcast with a guest, so experiencing a few technical difficulties from behind the Great Firewall of China here. If anybody doesn't know where the Ramsey Dewey podcast is filmed and produced, it's in the People's Republic of China. Anyway, we're back with Angelo Ferrer telling us all about the history of Kajukenbo.
So after that, like I was mentioning earlier, they started bringing in a lot of knife defense, sparring with knives and defending against knives. And then we were all told to go into this long lecture about why we shouldn't be training with knives. And then we train with knives, which was
Yeah.
kind of interesting. We talk about, and if you talk to any of the knife specialists in our style, they'll go on a long spiel about why you shouldn't be training with a knife. And then
Okay.
we'll start training with knives.
So is that a distinction between, like, everybody knows, like, don't get into a knife fight because you'll get stabbed, but they're
Yeah.
saying don't train with the knives.
Well, what they're saying is don't get into a knife fight.
Okay.
Don't get into a knife fight. But if you do, this is what you're gonna have
Okay.
to do. And remember that this is in that very 0.001 chance that you're for some reason surrounded on all four sides in a closet.
Yeah. For whatever reason.
For whatever reason, you're in a
you
closet.
have to fight a guy
You've
with
been
a
put
knife.
in a closet, and your serial killer abductor is in front of you with a knife.
Yeah.
Then this is what you should do. Because otherwise, 9 times out of 10, my favorite self-defense technique for knife is so you face your opponent. All right,
Okay.
you're facing eye contact.
All right,
make
sure,
sure
I'll be
you
the
don't get poked.
knife-wielding guy. Hold
It
on.
was good. He's got the knife.
Here's my knife.
All right, so the first thing
It's
you want to
actually a
do
pen.
is check your distance. All right, you check your distance. Once you check your distance, you're gonna pivot this way, and you're gonna pivot here, and then
For the audio-only listeners, Angelo Ferrer has run away.
that is a 100% foolproof plan to not get stabbed. If
Yeah.
you keep the distance, and even when you're doing the actual knife fighting, if you don't want to get stabbed, keep the distance is your main goal. In fact, a lot of our drills have to do with trying to get enough distance to get away, because your goal
Yeah.
is always to run away.
You know, in my own experience with knives, because I've been mugged a number of times. I used to live in Argentina in the Villas de Miseria down there, and it's rough neighborhoods. So I spent several years down there, and so I got mugged a lot, gunpoint and knife point. And one thing I realized is the only reason someone will show you the weapon first is if they want to rob you, if they want your money. If they intend to kill you, they are not going to show you that weapon.
No,
You're not going to see a knife coming if they intend to kill you.
no, no, no. That's actually brought up by here's another name I'm going to butcher. John Hawkman? Hawkman?
Not John Heckleman?
No,
Okay.
not John Hackelman. It's John Hawk.
John Hawk?
Something like that. He's a GKD knife guy. And he
Okay.
talks about the same stuff. He trains police officers. He's also a Kajukenbo guy. He trains police officers and military personnel. And he always tells them that he's training more police officers. But if you want to hear a good podcast, I believe it's John Hawk, Hock. Primal Radio has a good podcast about him talking about how he talks to his police officers about knife training, about how,
Yeah.
especially as a police officer, when you approach someone who has a knife, they're definitely not going to be showing you the knife because you have a gun.
Exactly. And you're a police officer. If you
Yeah.
hold out a knife, you're going to jail.
Yeah, or you're lucky if all you do is go to jail if you pull a knife out of a cop.
Exactly. He's going to get backup. His friends are going to be mad.
So for him, he was always talking about how the scary thing as a police officer is they have these rules of engagement where you're not allowed to come up to someone who seems unarmed and pull out your gun on them. So he talks about how knife disarmament for them is very important, again, as a police officer, because by the time the person pulls out the knife, they're waiting for the police officer to be at this distance right here.
Yeah.
And at that point, knives are live all the time. It's not like a gun.
Yeah.
A gun.
There's no safety on a knife.
Yeah, there's no safety on a knife. So
And it never runs out of
and
ammo.
it never runs out of ammo. Anybody who's played any good zombie game.
That's your go-to weapon as soon as your gun runs out of ammo. Exactly.
But yeah. So that's the scary thing about a knife is it's always live. So as a police officer, if you have to take away someone's knife, even if you have a gun, by the time you know they have a knife, the draw speed for the knife and the draw speed for your gun, they're actually an advantage. So they start talking about stuff like two hands on the weapon at all times. and then waiting for your partner to pull his gun. All you're really trying to do is slow down the person for someone to come in with a gun to help you.
Yeah.
If you know, and then again, then they always talk about like being able to assess whether that person might have the knife or not. So you keep, again, our safe distancing is big for knife training. It's mostly distancing.
And also working in a team, that's a big thing. You know, if the self-defense industry was a lot more honest, I'm very vocal about this. I'm a big critic of the self-defense industry because most of it is fear-mongering.
Yeah.
And like anybody selling a fantasy that if I teach you unarmed martial arts, you'll be able to defend yourself on the streets against bigger, stronger attackers with weapons and multiple opponents, that's a fantasy. If they were honest about that, they would say, get some friends with you who have your back and get some weapons. And if you look at police, that's exactly what they do.
Yeah.
So, yeah, man. But that's not a sexy fantasy like,
no, it's not. It's not.
Kicking everybody's butt like Bruce Lee.
But again, like people, and these are people who train with knives. I personally do not like training with knives. I saw the work and I'm like, yeah, I don't like this. Like,
Yeah.
I don't like this. And one of the things that they like to do to really bring reality into play is they'll grab a black belt, they'll match him up with a white belt, and they'll have him do some knife sparring. And what do you know? The black belt got stabbed. Training.
Usually many times.
Training.
I've done this drill so many times.
Training for, doesn't matter how many years you've been training.
Yeah.
You know, there's no way you go 3 minutes in a knife fight. Every second that passes in the knife fight, you are going to get stabbed. They both got stabbed. It's not this overwhelming difference where suddenly the black belt is overpowering because of the knowledge. It's just a knife is just.
Oh yeah.
It's a live weapon. It's a dangerous weapon.
I've done that drill a bunch of times, and with only one exception, and I'll get into that exception in just a moment. With only one exception, the fewest number of times I ever got stabbed before being able to disarm the knife was 6. And that's the fewest. And that was against a smaller, weaker, uncoordinated, like this girl who'd never picked up a knife, never had a thought of violence in her mind, as far as I know. And 6 stabs like that would have killed me. And yeah, that was the least number. But the only time I ever got away with disarming somebody in a fake knife drill was this guy who claimed to be a Krav Maga instructor.
That's like,
and this
guy irony at its best, really.
I know, right? He was just so bad at his job that he was actually worse than this completely untrained, uncoordinated girl who'd never touched a weapon in her life. Somehow, I don't know how you do that, but his training actually made him worse.
Oh man.
There's going to be a Krav Maga expert out there saying, "Why do you hate my style, man?" Like,
nothing against Krav Maga. I mean,
it was that specific guy. That specific guy sucks. It's not you, my friends. It's not you. It's him.
So, but yeah, that's part of the history. That's why there's knife training in Kajukenbo.
Yeah.
Now, what's happened to Kajukenbo since then? Well, a lot of people have heard of Hawaiian Kenpo, and they've never heard of Kajukenbo.
Okay.
And the reason for this...
And that's the style that John Hackleman does, right?
Yes. That's the style that John Hackleman founded, actually.
Okay.
The whole idea of Hawaiian Kenpo. And what he decided to do was create a fighting system that had no forms and focused just on the self-defense and the striking elements for sport, like for MMA and for kickboxing. John Hackleman's background's boxing, but he also did kickboxing with Benny the Jet Rodriguez.
Urquidez.
That's it.
There you go.
That's it. I'm bad at names. I'm clarifying that
Jet, man.
for anybody
cool.
who's interested. Yeah. So yeah, he did some training with him for his kickboxing and kind of put together a program using kind of that kind of stuff, right? So that's why, and later, if you don't know who John Hackleman, that's Chuck Liddell's coach. So that's where Kajukenbo is present in the UFC. Whenever you see Hawaiian Kenpo, the roots of Hawaiian Kenpo
guys like Court McGee, for example. I believe he's I don't remember what his rank is, but yeah, he holds a rank in Hawaiian Kenpo under John Hackleman, I believe. Yeah,
and that's a lot of guys. So a lot of anybody who's coming from the pit. That's the name of his fight crew.
Yeah.
They're going to be coming from a Hawaiian Kenpo background, which is roots going back to Kajukenbo, which is what the Kajukenbo guys do. The only difference is that
Yeah.
we have forms and they don't.
So is there a rivalry between Hawaiian Kenpo and Kajukenbo? Because a lot of times when one group splinters off of another, it turns into a bitter rivalry. Is there anything like that happening?
I want to say no, not with me.
Okay.
Not with me. Have I seen
Are there
rivalries?
any like turf wars going on?
Have I seen rivalries? Yeah. Have I heard of turf wars? Yes. I think my instructor told me a long time ago that he went to a Kajukenbo tournament, and I forgot what groups were fighting. I forgot if it was without naming names, because if anybody listens from Kajukenbo, they were there and they know more about it than I do. But apparently there was some rival schools, but this had nothing to do with Hawaiian Kenpo. They were both
Okay.
Kajukenbo schools,
Okay.
just from different areas. One was, I believe, from Long Beach, and the other one, I believe, was from another part of Los Angeles. I can't remember this correctly, but they were from two different parts of LA, and apparently there was some rivalry. And when these people, I guess, point sparring in Kajukenbo is full contact point sparring.
Yeah.
So, and groin shots are allowed.
Okay.
So
Do they wear groin protection when they do this?
they should be. There's an ongoing saying in Kajukenbo class that if you didn't wear your cup, why didn't you wear your cup?
Yeah, man. If
Why didn't you wear your cup?
if groin shots are allowed, man, wear like a steel cup or
Yeah.
something like that. Drill some holes backwards in it so it's got little pointy
Little
things.
point things at the end.
So it's worse for them than for you.
So they were doing their full contact point sparring, and I guess there was a controversial call.
Yeah.
They both sides disagreed, and next thing you know, because everyone watching were fighters, and they all just started duking it out on the floor, rivalry style. But as far as rivalry between Hawaiian Kenpo and Kajukenbo, from what I know, no. Have I heard of rivalries before? I've heard of them.
Yeah.
But in modern day, I haven't seen anything aside from people mostly talk. Like I've heard,
Yeah.
if you read David Tivier's book, the Kajukenbo Connection on Amazon, there you go, plug in for David Tivier's. He talks about how the student that went to get the police when
Yeah.
Joe was stabbed.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna say it. And I'm sorry.
Just say it, Angelo. Just say it.
His name is Godin.
Oh.
Godin, Master.
The name
Godin,
is out there.
Godin, Grandmaster Godin. I think it's Grandmaster. I'm bad at title names too. Just letting you know. He went to go get the police, but some people claimed
Okay.
he ran away and left him to die.
Ah.
So
That's why this is a potentially controversial thing.
yeah,
to bring up. Okay.
yeah, and so he is John Hackelman's instructor, who was the guy who I told you was like, you do
Dun,
whatever,
dun,
fucking
dun.
dun dun dun. So there's like the connection between those three things. So supposedly there has been word that some people have held resentment towards
Yeah.
that, which is why some people from that school call it Kajukenbo with an M and not a N, to differentiate from the guys that are. I don't know. I don't want to call them. I don't want to label them. But there's this thing called KSDI. It's called the
Okay.
Kajukenbo. Oh man,
Let
my
me get
name.
this straight though. There's Kajukenbo with an M
N
and Kajukenbo with an N.
yes, with an M and an N.
Wow, this is
The people that added the M were because, not to give away too much stuff that happens in that book, because
Yeah.
I want people to read the book
okay.
without giving away too much. When his brother got stabbed, Godin was kind of disassociated.
Okay.
But then later, he came back and he was given back his title and rank. But there
Okay,
was
so they like took away his
So
black belt. We
this-
talked about
yeah.
this a little last.
Yeah, we talked about it a
this
little
guy
bit.
was
Got
like excommunicated
he was
from
kind
the
of
fold, if you will.
excommunicated. He got into some legal problems, ended up getting locked up for a while.
Yeah.
Did his time, served his time, came out, and kind of turned his life around type of deal. Really, really great story. I hope, from what I believe, I think there's a book being written about that too. Not out yet, but not by me, but by some people that I know. Turned his life around,
Yeah.
started his school, and at that point, Cedro came back and said, "Hey, let's just bygones be bygones. Let's just let this go. I don't care." And he said, "I didn't run away. I didn't run away." And he's like,
Yeah.
"I don't care." Right. but they're still against some with some of the people on the top, some of the old schoolers. There's still maybe some tension there. All the new school people hardly even know this story. They have the story I talked about, the bar fight. Like, I can tell you this because I read the book and I read the police transcripts. So I'm like, okay, this is what really happened. But as you know, with martial arts and stories, how those go, it's always that person said and this person I told and I was told. And so the version I was told was he was at a bar, but he was fighting Navy. He was fighting military personnel in the story I was told.
Okay.
And that's not true. That's not what the police transcripts say. He actually, the guy who stabbed him actually ended up getting arrested later for murder.
Interesting.
And he actually killed a few. He was a murderer. The guy killed a few people. Some might say if you kill enough people by stabbing them, you're a serial murderer. But...
And we're back again, back from behind the Great Firewall of China with Angelo Ferrer, telling us about the history of Kajukenbo. Now, there's been a little bit of name dropping here, talking about the dark side of the history of Kajukenbo, and man, a little bit about martial arts rivalries. Now, there was a podcast I did with Jordan Chow, who, if you watch my videos, he's the stabby guy that stabs everybody with a knife all the time. And we did a podcast where he talked a little bit about a rivalry between two jiu-jitsu gyms, and he didn't even mention any names, didn't say who they were, just said there are two jiu-jitsu gyms in Shanghai and they have a bit of a rivalry, and he talked about that a little bit. I didn't think much of it until after that podcast was posted on YouTube. And then my phone blew up with all of these comments, angry comments from like both of these jiu-jitsu gyms that didn't even get named. And people were challenging me to fights. People were like,
oh my gosh.
Oh man. People were giving me tongue lashings like, how dare you? How dare you? And it was pretty intense for a while. And so I talked to Jordan like, hey Jordan, are you getting any of these messages like this? He's like, yeah. To which I immediately said, we have to do another one of these podcasts, man.
Well, luckily, all the names I dropped, I mean, this is all public knowledge. There's a book written about it. The worst thing that I may have done is mispronounce some names.
Okay.
But I'm not...
So my phone is probably not going to explode
with Kajukenbo
tonight, and John Hackelman's gonna approach me and say, I challenge you to a death match.
No. You should be okay. And if he does, just let me know, and he can probably hate me too. He's probably gonna hate me after this. But yeah, again, like, yeah. So that's kind of like, it was. I want to say this is more old school stuff. Yeah. I think one of the biggest rivalries, not rivalries, the biggest political tension coming in Kajukenbo today is all the old schoolers have passed away. All the people I've talked about, all these stories I talked about, Seijo's passed away. Shizu has passed away. That's the grandmaster from my school. Yeah. A lot of these people are actually around. I want to say, no, I shouldn't say it. So I'm not sure. I'm just going to say that most of the people in the stories I mentioned have passed away either by natural or unnatural causes. Well, Joe by unnatural causes, right? He got stabbed. He got stabbed.
In all fairness, there are not a lot of other ways to pass away.
Yeah. So, so what happened, and here's another story about living testaments and why they're so important.
Yeah.
There was nothing really in a will that said, okay, when I die, the next Seijo, the next leader of Kajukenbo is going to be this person.
Seijo, that's the title.
That's the title
leader.
that they're using. Yeah,
okay.
And they're probably going to say it's Chinese. They're probably going to say it's Chinese. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not big on titles either.
So you mentioned Kajukenbo uses like Chinese honorific titles like Shifu and Sigong, things like that.
Which is problematic, in my opinion. The Kajukenbo community loves it. I love you. You're my Ohana. I have nothing against the Kajukenbo community.
Yeah.
But I do have a hard time with titles. Like,
same here, man.
Here's a question for you. Where's the fine line between saying that you appreciate a culture and it's now cultural appropriation? Where is the fine line in that with titles?
That's a good question. I don't put a lot of stock into cultural appropriation, but at the same time, I'm a big proponent of picking a language and sticking with it. So, for example, there was a while back, like when jujitsu guys started getting really into leg locks a while back. They're like, "What? Why would you ignore 50% of the human body, just like John Danaher has? Whoa, legs exist. Let's break them." And so they started referring to the straight ankle lock, which had previously been known in the jiu-jitsu world as the straight ankle lock forever and ever. Everybody started calling it ashi, short for like ashigarami or something like that.
Ashi meaning foot in
Yeah.
Japanese, yeah.
So everybody started to call footlocks ashi. I'm like, okay,
Which
that's,
just means foot,
just
by
means
the way.
foot. Right? I know exactly, and I'm like, what's? It's called the straight ankle lock. Like ashi is that's just
Well,
confusing.
it gets worse. Ashi,
Yeah.
ashi actually just means the entire lower section, so it can be
Interesting.
leg too.
Interesting. So basically, just the any potential target on the lower body.
Yeah, from
It could
hip
be a
down,
hip lock. It could be a knee
hip
bar. It
down.
could be a straight
It's
ankle lock.
ashi.
It could
It's
be
called
a heel
ashi.
hook, a toe hold.
In Japanese, they actually have a term for each one of these, and it's not
Yeah.
ashi. It's not ashi.
But again, the jiu-jitsu community was going nuts, mixing their languages. I mean, nobody did this with. I shouldn't say nobody because I do know a few people did with the triangle choke. Nobody called it sankaku jime or whatever, you know. But well, actually, Neil Melanson did. But he made that distinction for a very specific type of triangle choke. He was like, "This is a different one. It's not like a reverse one. It's not a inverted one. So I'm just going to use the Japanese term for it because it's different, the way he taught it." So if you read his book, Mastering Triangle Chokes, which is excellent, there's a very specific type of triangle choke that he gives the Japanese name, Sankaku Jime. Yeah, I'm a big fan. Pick a language and stick to it. Like I told you this story last night when we were talking about my old Thai boxing coach, Chanan Sinsub, goes by the nickname Rock or Luck, and he is one of the best Muay Thai fighters ever, man. He's amazing. One of the best Muay Thai fighters I've ever trained with. He was a Lumpini Boxing Stadium champion. He holds 3 national titles in Thailand. He has a fight record of like 360 something fights, mostly wins. Just a phenomenal fighter and coach. And there is a Thai word, which again I will probably mispronounce, crew, which means coach basically. And the most honorific title in Muay Thai, the equivalent of Grandmaster or Great Coach, is like Quinn Crew. And I tried to call him this once. And he just starts laughing at me like, "What? Just call me by my name? That's ridiculous. Why would you say that?" Like, he wouldn't even let me call him crew or whatever, or even coach. He's just like, "Call me by my name." Like, we're not at that level, man. We're friends. And it was just weird to him. And so, yeah, it's weird to me. For most of the time that I've been coaching, nobody called me coach. Everybody just called me Ramsey. And it wasn't until a few years ago I had this student, this girl named Emma, and she was this very small, slightly built person, but very, very determined to learn and put in a lot of hard work. And she was the first one to call me coach. And then other people started calling me coach, and it just kind of picked up. I'm like, okay, fine. If they're gonna call me that, I'll take it. But anytime somebody calls me like master or whatever, I'm like, no, let me shut that down right now, this instant, or sensei if they're not Japanese, or shifu or whatever if they're not Chinese.
Yeah.
If they were Chinese, that would be weird.
Yeah, it gets even weirder. That's the whole reason. Like, I used to not really care about it at all. I was just like, all right, cool. Well, first degree black belt in Kajukenbo is called a sifu. I believe 5th degree is called a sigang.
Yeah.
I believe it's like 6th, 7th. I forgot what it is. But after that, the next titles that come along after you get enough stripes is professor, and then after that you get some more stripes and it's grandmaster. But I heard originally it wasn't that. I heard originally it was just chief. I believe they used to use the word chief,
Okay.
and then there was Sijo. I forgot what, there was one more in there, but I believe that was those were the only really, and chief just to be short for chief instructor type of deal. That's it.
Okay.
It was a little later in the history when we were approached by the Ed Parker Kenpo guys, and that wanted to kind of merge with our associations, and we allowed a merger. Then there was an indiscrepancy about what the titles were, because they didn't, they used those titles, and we're like, well, what titles We don't have those titles. We have this title. Okay, well then, let's merge the titles, and that's where all that came from. Apparently, according to me, I don't. Maybe disclaimer. Maybe from what I've heard.
These Chinese honorific titles are weird because, like in the West, in like kung fu circles, you hear them like sifu or shifu. Sifu is the Shanghainese pronunciation because they turn the sh into sibilant like s sounds. So in Shanghainese dialect, it's actually pronounced Shanghai as opposed to Shanghai. Yeah, mind blowing, right? So when I first got here and talked to some older folks, because you'll hear mostly with the older folks, and they said Shanghai. I was like, what the heck are you? What city is that? And I had a good friend named Shizheng, and his mother, an older Shanghainese woman, would call him Xizang, like that. And so, yeah, like the vowels, the consonants change a lot, man. But as far as honorific titles people actually use in martial arts teaching and coaching, Jiaolian, which means coach. That's like the only one I've heard. The only other one would be like Lao Shi, which means teacher, but that's very rare. That's like less than a coach.
And that's even amongst the kung fu community. Just checking.
The kung fu community, I don't know.
Yeah, because I don't.
I don't know. I don't really. The only time I ever heard anybody referred to as a master, as a shifu, was this time I met this Tai Chi master, an actual Tai Chi master who knew how to fight.
And we're saying master here, not
like actual master,
not like instructor, not coach, master.
Yeah,
like maybe
like a guy who had been training for
like at the top. Like he's the person sitting, like maybe in American terms they'd say like great grandmaster. He's the old guy in the top.
Yeah, this isn't rank anybody awarded to him except for his students.
Okay,
like his students called him master because he really was a master of the art.
Yeah, like
this guy knew how to fight. I sparred with him, and he tossed me all over the place because he knew how to wrestle, man. A lot of people don't know this, but Tai Chi Chuan is a grappling art. It's very similar to wrestling, and a lot of people have never seen a physically fit older person, and so they don't believe this story. Like, oh, in America, old people are in retirement homes and they can't even walk and they hobble around. But you know what? If you keep moving, you keep exercising, you can stay healthy and physically fit throughout your life. But anyway,
he was the master, and like, so this is the reason. Again, if you have the title of Sifu, and for anybody who likes titles, that's great. No offense to you, but my experience was I was totally okay with it. I didn't care.
Yeah.
And my students always ask me, well, what should we call you? I'm like, well, according to protocol in America, I've got the title of Sifu, call me Sifu Angelo. But if I ever caught anybody calling me Sifu outside of class, I'd be like, whoa. You can stop right now. When we have our gis on, when we're inside there, we're following protocols, we're following tradition, you call me Sifu. When we're out, you call me Angelo. And then it got even worse, because in a few years when I moved to Japan, and one of my friends, he's Chinese Canadian. Chinese Canadians don't say that. They just say they're Canadian. If you ever meet a Chinese Canadian, are you Chinese? No, I'm Canadian. Like, not even, that's like American thing. I'm Chinese American. Long story short, he his family, has got background. He's Chinese, and I told him, we did a podcast together and we were talking about Kajukenbo. And he's like, so in Kajukenbo we use the title. We had this same conversation. So I'm a Sifu. And he went, I'm like, dude, stop laughing. No, sorry. It's more. I'm like, okay, are we done? Like, press pause on the recorder. All right, are you good? You got it out of your system. What is going on? He's like, it's just, no offense. It's just,
I mean, it's what you call taxi drivers in China.
What he said is that he practiced traditional kung fu also.
Yeah.
And he came out to China to train under someone who, very similar to the guy that you met, was an older guy. Only one guy, and he's only seen this one guy have the title of Sifu. Yeah. Very old, straight out master, the old school training, making people go up and down stairs, and the concrete, that whole traditional
Yeah.
kung fu training. And there was only one, told me the same thing. There was only one Sifu. That's it. Like, that's like the lead guy. And they're all, if they exist, there's not that many of them. And if they exist, they're really old. So that's why it's really funny. Like,
Yeah,
you're like in your 30s and you're saying Sifu like that.
I know, right?
He
It's
found
like
that really
these-
weird.
Again, in the West, these honorific titles, these honorific Asian titles, almost become participation trophies.
In a way.
And yeah, like everybody can get one. Everybody deserves one. Everybody can be a Sifu or a sensei or a Sigong or whatever. And yeah, it's weird, man. It's weird. So again, I'm a big fan. Pick a language and stick to it. That's why I like the term coach, because it's simple. It doesn't really have any errors about it. It's just a person who coaches athletes,
Yeah.
which is it's a description of my job. That's it.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah. And I think that's fair. That's totally fair.
So let's talk about street fights for a minute. So Angelo, you got into martial arts specifically because you got into some scraps when you were a kid.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So, for those people that like the streets,
The streets.
I'm from the streets.
Angelo's from the streets, yo.
Yeah. Came out of a garbage can. They found me in a garbage can. I'm just kidding. But all joking aside, I came from a rougher area of the great area of San Diego. It's a small town called Escondido. Escondido, I guess between us and El Cajon, I believe, or South San Diego, we kind of rival each other in our crime statistics on how many shootings, stabbings, and drugs are being sold. So there is a really big gang problem in Escondido. There was. It's gotten a little bit, from what I heard, my brother still lives in the area, and he tells me that the drive-by shootings have come down to about once a month to once every 2 months.
That's coming down?
Yes.
Okay.
It's down to once a month to once every 2 months, which is great because apparently it was getting really bad and it was happening every week.
Yeah.
So the way it happens, the way crime works in Escondido was there's two gangs in Escondido, the Diablos and the West Siders.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, they're both Crips. The whole Bloods and Crips thing, we can grab that shit and throw out the window.
So it's like a division of the Crips.
It's a division
kind
of
of like
the
that division of
Crips.
Kajukenbo. We were
Yeah,
talking about.
yeah. It's a division of the Crips.
But yeah, that always happens when a group splinters. It's like they hate the thing that is most like themselves.
Yeah. So they're both,
but slightly different.
yeah, they're both the same. So they had to differentiate their colors between blue and white and black and white. Black and white being Diablos, blue and white being West Siders. And I was born in the West Side. West Side.
Are you flashing gang symbols up on the screen on this podcast?
And no, I'm not in the West Side gang. And it's funny because I always saw people doing this, right?
Are we gonna have a drive-by here after this?
You always see people on like what this is actually supposed to be West Coast, the whole West Coast.
Okay.
But what I thought was funny in my neighborhood was that no one was allowed to do this because if you did this, it meant that you were part of the West Side gang, and then you'd be opt being shot or jumped by the Diablos. And if you weren't in the West Side gang and you were doing that, you were opt to be jumped and or possibly shot by the West Siders because they didn't want anybody claiming to be in their gang that wasn't.
Yeah.
So during that whole craze where I saw a lot of, well, no offense, I saw a lot of white folk
Yeah.
throwing up gang signs. in their-
Cultural appropriation of gang behavior. There we go.
Yeah, good culture to be PC about it. Yeah, it was really weird to me because I'm like, dude, you can't do that. Like where I'm from, that'll get you shot or jumped or both, which is why, like growing up, I had to almost hide. I like hip hop music, but I had to hide that because anything that could be associated with the gang was going to get you in trouble. Because if the gang members thought, oh, you like hip hop, oh, you want a gang, you want to bang, G? That's what they always want. You want to bang, because they were always recruiting. So if they saw you kind of leaning towards that path, that would mean listening to hip hop music, wearing baggy pants, wearing sport paraphernalia.
Yeah.
I grew up not wearing sport paraphernalia for fear of being shot.
Like any type of sports?
Any type of
paraphernalia?
sports.
Not just
Zero.
like a specific team? or
No,
anything?
because what would happen, now here's the problem. Yeah. So if you wear San Diego Chargers,
Okay.
That was San Diego Chargers was what they belonged to. They were the San Diego Chargers was the gang, the local gang's colors, if you will.
Hmm.
So San Diego Chargers at the time were still in San Diego. Now they're not. That's a different story. Blue and gold, blue and yellow.
Okay.
Black and white, Diablos, Raiders.
Ah.
Oakland Raiders. I don't know what Raiders they are now.
Okay.
So so I thought when I was younger, okay, well, I can't wear Chargers stuff because then the West Side Gang's going to want to jump me in. I can't wear Raiders stuff, otherwise the Raiders are going to jump me in. Maybe I'll pick a different team. I don't really watch sports, but I kind of want, it's kind of cool at school to wear sport paraphernalia. I kind of want to wear something cool. And I was thinking maybe I'll wear baseball. Baseball.
Okay.
These guys are into football. I'm going to wear a baseball cap. I'm going to wear the Pirates. I forgot what team Pirates are.
Yeah.
But I want to wear a Pirates hat.
Okay.
I was like maybe, how old was I? I was like maybe 11 or 12 or so. And I walk outside with my Pirates cap on to go get a burrito from the local shop. Hey, homie, what the fuck? Where you from? I'm like, and I point at my house. Right over there. I'm from right there. No. Where you from, Holmes? I'm like, nowhere, man. I'm from here. I know your friend. I know all the gang members because I used to be a Jehovah's Witness and I preached to all of them.
Yeah.
And so like, hey, man, I know Pancho. Like, he's like, oh, take that hat off, man. I'm like, huh? He's like, you're not Vario Posoles. Take the hat off, Holmes. And I'm like, oh, what? Oh, okay. And I'm not gonna argue. It's just a stupid cap. Took off the hat. All right, cool. It's apparently another gang
Interesting.
that I was not aware of from another town in another area of San Diego called Oceanside. Apparently, they're wearing baseball caps.
Wow.
I don't know.
I wonder what the businesses that produce these hats and jerseys.
Where
and
does the
stuff must think about
sponsorship
this.
comes from?
I mean, because if just ordinary people can't wear or buy their merchandise in these areas, I mean that's got to be a blow to their economy, man.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely no baseball caps, no do-rags, no bandanas. Forget bandanas.
Unless it's a plot to hyperinflate the price of those products.
Maybe. Conspiracy theory.
Well, there we go. The real reason we have street gangs to increase the price of merchandise.
The price of merchandise. Yeah.
Supply and demand. Basic economics, guys.
So yeah, like I was okay with the local street gang, but the reason I got into martial arts, before I became a teenager, growing up as a kid, I would see people being jumped, stabbed, shot.
Yeah.
I remember one time my neighbor, and this is why street fighting never made sense to me, because it just never ended well. It never ended well. Like you just talked about, the best defense against someone with a knife is to have a group of your friends.
Yeah.
To outnumber them.
Exactly, and I'm basically describing a gang, right?
Yeah.
Friends with weapons.
Friends with weapons.
Exactly.
So friends with weapons with sport paraphernalia. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So I remember this one guy that moved into our neighborhood, and he came into our neighborhood, and there wasn't a lot of white folk in our neighborhood. It was an ethnic enclave.
There we go.
It was an ethnic enclave. A Latino Latina, well, not by gender, be politically correct here. Enclave. So there wasn't a lot of white folk in the area, and the white folk that would move in, you would be fine if you kept to yourself.
Okay.
Don't start shit with people. And this guy...
that's a pretty good general rule.
That's a pretty good general rule for life, yeah. Not just in an ethnic enclave.
Just anywhere, man.
Anywhere, yeah. Don't start shit with people.
There you go.
He had a...
Self-defense 101.
Yeah, there you go.
Another lesson from Kajukenbo.
Little nugget of wisdom right there. But yeah, he moved into our town, and he was a hunter. He would go deer hunting. So he had a lot of guns. And apparently... some guys tried to jump him. And, well, it all started, he had a 4th of July party. He was playing loud music and having a party, and the drinking kind of was outside in the front yard.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the unsaid rules in our neighborhood was if you were going to have a family party, have a family party. You can have a family party in the front yard. That's not a big
Okay.
deal. Family barbecue. If you do have a family barbecue and there's some drinking involved, don't have it be all about drinking. Try to keep the drinking kind of out of the public eye would be best. Because
This was a rule set by
unsaid,
an unspoken rule. Okay.
unspoken rule. Because what would happen if you had too much drinking going on and debauchery and young people especially, it's no longer a family party.
Yeah.
You have some single guys, young males drinking out in the front yard. What's going to happen is some gang members are going to walk up, be like, "Hey man, so what's up? Can I party with you? Are we going to party?"
Yeah.
And then there was a few ways to diffuse this. The way I diffused this when I would have, 'cause I'd had it when I was younger, a little later in life, and fast forward when I was having the same kind of thing. If one of the gang members walked up, "Hey man, hey," like, "Hey man, you know, I can't exactly invite you into a party, but if you want a beer, I'll get you a beer. How many beers you want? How many friends you got? 6? All right, here." And I just viewed it as a don't have to call the cops or deal with any drama tax. Here,
Okay.
here's some beers. It costed me what, $6 maybe at most. And they're cool, we're cool. They understand they can't come inside and party with us, but at the same time, I'm not. They're just looking for respect. That's
Right.
all they're looking for is respect. They feel disrespected by society. They feel disrespected by the cops. They feel disrespected by everyone. So the way they earn respect in their communities is through violence. And so if you disrespect them, they're going to try to earn their respect through violence. But if you can de-escalate that situation and just find out what it is exactly. So in your situation, people were trying to mug you.
Yeah.
But in my situation, people were trying to earn respect. And that's a little difficult because you can't negotiate with them you don't exactly want to offer them money because then that'll turn into extortion.
Right.
They'll ask for monthly payments after that. But if you can find a way to be like, "Hey man, I respect," that was always my first nick in my mouth. "Hey man, I respect you. I mean to offend you, but," and then I'd throw in what I cannot do. And then I'd throw in what I can do. "I cannot let you into my house.
Right.
My family's in there. My dad's in there. My dad knows your dad." I'd always knew all their parents. My dad knows
Yeah.
your dad. How's Roberto doing? He's doing good. Okay, good.
Make it
And,
personal. Yeah.
and this conversation was in Spanish. We're having this conversation in Spanish. I'm like, but what I can do is, if you want to I can get you a few beers. I don't have enough beers for everybody. I can get you and the leaders, you and some of the veterans, the veteranos as they call them. I can get you guys a few
Right.
beers for dropping by. And thanks for keeping the rival gang out of the area. Because the rival gang would come in and rob people. And our local gang had a rule where they wouldn't rob anybody in our neighborhood. They'd go do all their crimes somewhere else. Mostly just drug dealing in the neighborhood, and any robberies and assaults would happen outside the neighborhood. Any robberies or assaults that would happen in our neighborhood was being conducted by the Diablos, the rival gang. So they were kind of like a local militia, I guess.
Yeah.
Right?
Bunch of local Robin Hoods.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, this is the neighborhood I grew up with. So going back to my story, the guy's out there, he's getting drunk.
Yeah.
He didn't know any of these unsaid, unspoken rules. So when the guy goes up, "Hey, what's up, homie? So we want to party this?" It's like, he said, "Get the fuck out of my yard."
Yeah.
And what? What? What'd you say? I said, "Get the fuck out of my yard." He's like, "We want to go?" He's like, "We'll go." And they started scrapping, and he beat him up, and he gained his respect through violence. But the only
Right.
problem is that if you do decide to go that route of fighting, if you do, which I do not recommend, if you
Right.
decide to go that route of fighting, you should go through the proper channels of fighting. Like my cousin did this.
Okay.
I told you this before.
Proper channels of fighting.
So like my cousin, he would get people, "Hey, what are you looking at, man?" He's like, "Hey man, I'm not looking at anything, but if you want to go, we can scrap. If you want to scrap, we can scrap, but we can't scrap here. Let's set up a time and a place and set up some ground rules on how we're gonna fight. If there's punching, kicking, grappling," and he did martial arts. And so we set the rules, and then we'll scrap. If we're gonna wear gloves, we're gonna wear gloves. If we're not gonna wear gloves, we'll set the rules and we'll fight on this day. And most of the time, because he did this, most of the time that was a de-escalation. "What? Who do you know?" And he'd say who he knew, and be like, most of the time for him, they'd be like, "Nah, man, I'm good," or they'd say,
Okay.
"Yeah, I'll show up on that day," and they wouldn't show up on that day. And then he'd tell, "Well, what happened?
Yeah.
You didn't show up." And they're like, "Oh," and then
That's
like his
interesting.
own gang members would turn around and be like, "Yeah, you didn't show up," so they'd call it bitching out. You bitched out. So like,
Yeah, that's fascinating psychologically because it gives you time to think about it. Like, one of the hardest things about professional fighting, amateur fighting, prize fighting, any type of combat sport is the interval in between finding out you have a fight and all of the waiting all of the anxiety leading up to that fight, where your mind imagines every worst case scenario. You imagine your opponent's going to kill you or leave you paralyzed in the ring or something horrible like that. And your heart starts beating when you think about it. And it's a nerve wracking experience. But a fight on the spur of the moment, when you're high on adrenaline and you're angry and you're emotional, we don't stop and think about that. So that was a genius thing that he did there.
Yeah.
Basically offering them a time interval in between the emotionally charged moment and, just a future potential fight.
Yeah, and they'd get tripped out on that. They'd be
Yeah.
like, because when he mentioned, okay, so are we grappling? Is there takedowns? Can we do ground and pounds? Is there submissions? Is
Yeah.
there, is kicking allowed? Kicking's for bitches, Holmes.
And that's also a
really?
smart thing to talk about because, if you watch like any street fight on YouTube, you can see thousands and millions of them maybe. What happens? People, they go out there, they start scrapping, they start throwing their arms at each other, they tie up, fall on the ground, and then other people in the crowd jump in and do one of two things. Either they pull them apart and say, stop fighting on the ground like a bunch of losers and
Yeah,
fight like
back
men
up.
with your fists, or they'll jump in and start kicking the people on the ground.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because, I don't know, there's just, again, unspoken rules that's what people
Yeah.
want to see
And on the street, the streets.
on the streets. Man,
So-
where's that? Where's that Master Wong clip? I do these things for the streets.
So, in my hood, the rules were mostly if you were going to end up going not the way my cousin's route of trying to organize something.
Yeah.
If you ended up letting the adrenaline get to you, and you're going to go at it. It was unsaid that you were not going to hit your opponent on the ground. You were not going to grapple. You were pretty much going to box.
Right.
Boxing rules. You were pretty
Bare
much
knuckle
going to
street
box.
boxing. Okay.
Bare knuckle street boxing. One person hits the ground. The gang members were usually allowed to do a ground and pound. That was kind of the unfair part. But you, as a bystander, if you initiate a ground and pound, would initiate, or if you initiated ground fighting, it's going to initiate them jumping you.
Right.
But if you stayed boxing, said, okay, we want to scrap, we're going to box. If you stayed boxing, they would essentially kind of make a circle around you, and that would be your ring, and you'd box it out.
Right.
And that was it. That was it. And some of the gang members I knew that would challenge other gang members, because they do this with each other too. Like I heard an altercation between my friend Pancho and another gang member who pulled a gun on him.
Ooh.
And he said, "Get out of my," they had some, I forgot what it was over, but he pulled a gun on him and said, "Hey man, I just said you want to scrap, we scrap.
Yeah.
You want to scrap, put the gun down, we'll scrap. But I'm not here for that." So the guy's like, "All right, we'll scrap." So he put his gun back. He gave his gun to someone else. "Okay, we'll scrap. We'll scrap. Okay, we're gonna scrap." And then they'll box. Box. That's really
Right.
important. Otherwise, the gun's gonna come back into play. So, again, the best scenario is to de-escalate the way my cousin did, because like most of the people would either back out, or then now you get to box with wraps and boxing gloves. He would provide the gear. I'll bring the gear. He'd have boxing gloves because he had all his sparring gear. Bring the
Ah.
box. We'll box. So that's how he would handle it. Now, this guy, going right back to our story with the loud 4th of July dude who ground and pounded and won. When that guy took off, he took off. 2 other guys came in like, fuck you, right? No, fuck you. And they're coming to jump him. He pulled out his gun because he's got guns. And they said, "Hey, we don't want any problems." And then about an hour later, I'm sitting in my front yard watching all this happen, and my little brother is like 2 or 3 playing in the front yard,
Yeah.
and I hear the music. In our neighborhood, whenever there was a drive by, you can hear the music first. It was like a siren.
Like a big loud subwoofer.
Subwoofer, and the car starts slowing down. Like normally, if you hear the car going like boom, and you hear a car driving at normal speed, but you hear it slow, that was first red flag. Car slowing down, slowing down. We call it creeping up. And sure enough, the windows opened up and pop, 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 and you start hearing shoots. They run in. Everyone's scattering. I'm on the other side of the house, but I can still hear ricochet bullets coming my side too.
Yeah.
So I run. I get low. I grab my brother and dive into the house, and
Yeah.
then the car takes off, and we come back, and I found bullet holes in the sides of my house.
But my
a
wife
few
has a
tree.
story very similar to this one. She grew up in Southern California. Yeah,
Southern California too. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, same place. Same place.
I
Maybe not
she
the same
actually got
town, but Southern
married in San
California.
Diego,
Oh, right.
but she's from Los Angeles County.
Okay, yeah, and LA again. I don't want to portray San Diego as a dangerous place. LA has a much bigger gang problem than San Diego does.
Yeah,
But yeah. So that moment, this is all before. This is the kind of neighborhood I was growing up in. This is the kind of violence that I was seeing.
right.
So violence was just scary to me. Like it was
As it should
terrifying.
be.
It was terrifying. I'm like, violence, and I was brought up pacifist. As I'm not a Jehovah's Witness now, but I was brought up to be a pacifist Jehovah's Witness. Preach about God.
Yeah,
Turn the other cheek. That whole philosophy was my family. So violence was never the answer. And then seeing these things, like, yeah, even if violence was an option, it's not a really good one. Like
right.
it doesn't end well. Even my cousin who would go in with the boxing matches, he'd come back with black eyes from boxing guy way bigger than him. They don't have weight classes, so he's sitting there. He's about 145 pounds, 150 pounds. Boxing guys are 215 pounds,
Man,
right? With their boxing rules.
there is a kid on the internet who keeps sending me these messages telling me that weight classes don't matter, and it's been scientifically proven that a lightweight can hit exactly the same as a heavyweight. And I keep telling him, man, what is the weather like over there in the neighborhood of make believe?
Yeah, don't test that out.
Please don't fight a
Yeah,
heavyweight.
don't test it out. Don't test it out.
Yeah,
Not a
smart
hypothesis.
idea.
Not a hypothesis. You don't need to test it out. Just look up YouTube clips. You'll find enough to show you that it's not. It's not going to work.
Yeah,
But yeah. So that's the neighborhood I grew up in, and I remember I always wanted to avoid being jumped. That was my night. I'd have nightmares as a kid of being jumped,
Yeah.
hearing the "foo-fee" whistle, and having people kicking me and stomping me on the ground. I was like, I do not want that. After school, I'd get out of school sometimes, or not even school. I'd come out of my house, and I'd look on the pavement, and there's just blood all over the pavement, leading onto the street. In the middle of the street, puddles of blood. And I heard someone getting jumped the night before, so I'm like,
yeah, man. Getting stumped by one guy sucks. Like when I first got here to China, MMA fights allowed kick stomps to the head of a downed opponent. And I didn't know that. They told me it was UFC rules, and then this guy comes in trying to kick and stomp and soccer kick me, and I'm like, wait a minute,
that's a total different game.
this is different, man.
Yeah, that's a total different game.
And that's just one guy.
Yeah,
So, man,
yeah. Once you start talking about 5, 6, 10, and then if you start talking about chains and weapons, it gets even worse.
yeah,
So I was always terrified of that. And parents, to avoid this, they knew they were scared too. They decided to put me in home studies. So I was and I wasn't like in a weird cult-like home studies. I know that's a lot going on right now. I was in a regular home studies program ran by the state. I studied the exact same subjects and curriculum that was being taught at school.
okay,
It was just being given to me at home, and I would meet with a teacher once a week at
Huh.
the school district, and they would review my homework and give me more assignments. So I had a state education of home because my parents did not want to put me in public school because they were afraid of not just that, but they were afraid
Yeah.
of also me being bullied because of the religion.
yeah,
So eventually,
Interesting.
this got broken up. I ended up going to regular middle school, a place called Grant, and the gangs were there, and my cousin was there. That was, I think, the only good thing about it was my cousin was there. So he told me a lot about these unsaid rules and stuff, and he told me, "Hey, man, if someone confronts you, you cannot walk away, because if you walk away, if you just decide to ignore them, they're gonna think you're disrespecting them, and then they're gonna jump you. They're gonna wait to jump you later after school. So you can't, but you can't be too aggressive either and come in and start fighting, because they might jump you anyway. So like, you got
It's a thin line you got to tread.
you got to stand your ground, ask them what they want of you, and try to avoid fighting. But if you have to, you're gonna have to fight. And when you do fight, make sure you are the first. Make sure you strike first. Make sure you're the first one to hit.
Strike first, strike hard, no mercy.
Yeah,
Oh man,
that was his advice. Make sure you're the first one to hit. Don't let them hit you. Don't let him hit you first. So I got my first challenge. I was like 12. This big guy, and it wasn't even that the big guy didn't like me. His friend didn't like me. His friend Alfredo did not like me. He's like, I heard you're from West Side, because I was on the other side of town when my parents got divorced. I'm like, hey man, I'm not from West Side. That's all bullshit. You know, I live here in this area, and even then, I'm not banging. I'm not a gangbanger. At that point, I never wore any type of colors. And so there's other friends like, so you must be a bitch. Yeah, he's just a bitch. I'm like, and then I remember my cousin told me, I'm like, no, I'm not a bitch either. He's like, oh yeah? Well, what are you gonna do, bitch? I'm like, look, what do you guys want to do? And we want to have you fight our guy. I forgot his name. We'll call him Jose for this podcast. Probably wasn't Jose. We want you to fight Jose. Hey, Jose. And Jose walks up, and we're kids, but he's still a good 20-pound bigger than these.
Jose's going to watch this podcast and be like, you got my name wrong.
Wrong. It's Jose. So he's like, all right, Holmes, we can go right now. I'm like, well, no, we can go, different time. No. We're going to go right now. We're doing this right now. I'm like, all right. Okay, we're doing this right now. I'll even let you have the first hit. All right. Okay. So I'm thinking and then he kind of stands up and puts his chest out. And I'm thinking, I've never studied any type of fighting at all.
Yeah.
The only thing I've been taught is how to throw a jab and a straight by my dad. And my dad told me, if you're going to punch someone, you either punch them in the nose or you punch them in the solar plexus. One of the two. And I thought, if I punch him in the nose and I break his nose, the idea of escalating. If I hurt him really badly, they're going to jump me. If I hurt him just enough that he's not injured, but he's hurt, but we can keep scrapping, that's kind of my goal.
Yeah.
So I say, okay, and I come in for my straight, hit him right in the solar plexus, and by shit luck, breathing was off, and I knocked the wind out of him.
Okay.
And he went, hoo! And he went down. And they were like, oh, shit. And I had the same face. Oh, shit. Everybody was like, they were the only ones surprised by this because, because before that, I'd only been one other school fight where I threw a haymaker at a kid. And it wasn't gang related. It was just schoolyard stuff. But this was my first adult, teenage fight. And he goes down on one knee.
At the age of 12, right?
Yeah. The fight before that was when I was 9. That was my first schoolyard brawl, I would say, between me and the guy. And I ended up knocking him out with a haymaker. And that's after that, I hurt my wrist. And that's when my dad's like, you got to learn some. We don't do violent. My mom, Mom would like me to tell you that we do not practice violence in this Jehovah's Witness household.
Right.
Shut the door. But so that's where I got those basics. So when he went down, I was thinking, oh shit, they're gonna jump me. And then by dumb luck, school bell rang. Teachers come out. Hey, what are you boys doing? And when they all look at me, they're all looking at me. So if he says that we started shit with him, we all get expelled for fighting. But I was thinking, if I say that they started shit with me, we all get expelled for fighting. Because I punched him. There's no way I can say, they were starting something. He's on the ground. And so I immediately run up to him, hey, man, are you okay? I'm like, he just tripped and fell. He's fine. You're okay, right? He's like, I'm good. So we stood up, and we all go back into class. And so the next week, I thought, we're good. And the next day, even they walked up to me, hey man, the whole school starts talking, hey man, we heard you knocked out Jose. Yeah, we heard you knocked him down. And everyone's like, pat on the backs and everything. And I was like, yeah, and it's just a lucky punch. And even Jose's like, that was a pretty good punch, man. I'm like, all right, cool, we're good. I got out of this. And a week later, hey man, we're playing a game of tag. And I'm like, that's kind of weird. They're 12, 13. I haven't played tag in years. Like, what are you talking about tag? Yeah, we're playing tag, man. Let's play. You're it. I'm like, all right, cool. So I start running, chasing one of them, and they lead me behind this area of the school where there's some construction going on. There's nobody there. And there's a narrow hallway that I'm chasing this kid at. And when I run through that hallway, it's out in a kind of not an open clearing. It's still surrounded by buildings. And there's a circle of them waiting.
Oh.
And I'm like,
it was a setup the whole time.
And then I turn around to go back to the hall, and the guy I punched, Jose, is standing right there. And I'm like, oh, dude, this is it. This is that nightmare situation. This is where I get jumped. Luckily, they don't have weapons because we're at school, but they're going to stomp me and they're going to hit me. So I try to hit the first guy as hard as I can. and I knock him down, but then I feel something from the back of my head, and I don't know what hit me. Somebody hit me
Yeah.
from the back of my head. I kind of black out a little bit. I hit the ground, dust. The next kick comes to my nose, and then my nose is bleeding. And now I'm thinking like, all right, I don't want them to kick my teeth in, so I'm just gonna get into fetal position. And if they hit me in the back, and so I remember I went like that. I brought my head in. I covered the back of my neck,
Yeah.
and I kind of just brought my elbows up, and they started kicking me. But then the kicking started lightening up. Like I felt there wasn't that much kicking coming from the right side. And I look over, and I can kind of see out of the corner of my eye that one of the guys has disappeared. And then I start getting up, and I start scrapping, and I feel like there's less people. And then I see a giant hand come over one of the other guys and pull him back. And it was a friend of mine named Victor,
Yeah.
who at that point, he would so when I started coming to that school, me and David started sparring. We started doing some sparring. My scary cousin David, the guy who told me all these great rules or whatever. So I still wasn't kicking. I still felt that boxing was the best.
Right.
Then he watched a lot of Bruce Lee, read a lot of Jeet Kune Do books, so he kind of had like a Jeet Kune Do philosophy for his stuff. But long story short, me, this guy, and Victor, who was held back 3 years because he was slow. Back then they didn't have the No Child Left Behind Act, so you were left behind. And Victor was left behind
Oh
by
man.
3 years.
One of my childhood bullies was in that same situation. He was like 2 or 3 times the size of the other kids because he'd been held back several years and had a growth spurt. And oh man, I had a fight with this dude. Knocked me down on the ground. It sucked. It's basically like a small child fighting a grown man.
That's what it was. That's what it was. And I got, luckily he was on my side.
Yeah.
So we fought him off. He told me he did karate. And that was the first time I thought to myself, hey, there might be something up with this karate stuff.
Yeah.
And that's how I started informally training. I still wasn't allowed to train in a school. But again, I did not like street fighting. I didn't want it. I didn't like it. That one time I got jumped, my students asked me now, so how many street fights have you been in? And I told them these stories. Like, yeah, but that was when you were a kid. How about when you're after you're 18? I'm like, oh. The whole reason I started doing this was so I wouldn't have to street fight. That was the whole reason I got into martial arts. Like, once we did that, me and my cousin started sparring, like every week, whenever we could. We'd spar in my front yard. All the gang members saw us sparring. If they ever said they want to join in, we'd be like, come on in. You can spar with us. But
Yeah, I tell you what, though, the young guys, they want those stories. And I'll tell you why, because we think that we communicate with information and with data. But humans, like all of us, young, old, etc., we all communicate with stories. And, kids are no different. So when we're teaching martial arts, they don't just want information. This is how you throw a punch or a kick or do an armbar. They want a story to go with it. I mean, that's why there's a ring announcer in a fight show. That's why I do what I do with Kunlun Fight. I tell a story. I don't just say he's throwing a punch and a kick. That's boring. Nobody cares about that. They want a narrative. They want to know who these guys are. They want to know why they're fighting, even if it's just some random matchup. They want to know why this is happening. And it's the same thing with your students asking, how many street fights have you been in? They want a narrative. And the narrative of street fights suck and you shouldn't do them, it's a disappointing one to a
Yeah.
young man with a young man's ego.
yeah, and that's
Yeah,
what they always say.
but
And
it is
like,
the truth.
yeah, and they always ask me like, but that was all when you were a kid. But wait a second, you didn't start doing Kajukenbo till you were 18.
Yeah.
So you're telling me that from when you were 12 and you got jumped, you never got in a street fight after that? I'm like, no, I didn't have to. I didn't have to. I did my martial arts training. It made me more confident. After I became more confident, people, when I told them I didn't want to fight, they knew it was from a place of not because I can't, because I literally don't want to. It's not the people in my neighborhood that were looking for respect through violence. They knew that if that was the option, that we could, but I don't want to. And they didn't want to either. That's always the conversation that it was. Do you want to do this? Not really, but if you want to, we do it at this time. I don't really want to either. Okay, then why are we doing this? What's the point? What's the point? That was always what it came down to. So yeah, and for my students that heard that, like I'm like, yeah. And then when I turned 18, years later, I was looking for a martial art that encompassed. I found too much bullshito out there.
Oh man, it's all over the place.
Yeah, too many McDojos, I'd walk into a McDojo. They'd be like, "You get a free trial lesson. All right, cool. When's the sparring? We're gonna do the sparring on this day." And then I'd come in. Okay, let's spar. And I just wipe the floor with all their students. It looks like they're like, "Oh, you're doing excessive contact."
Meaning any contact at all.
And I was like, I just threw. I know what it wasn't. I wasn't coming and throwing haymakers. Me and my cousin have been sparring for years. Before I walked into a dojo, me and my cousin were doing light contact sparring. The last full contact sparring me and my cousin
And
did.
for anybody doubting, I've sparred with Angelo a number of times. He's got excellent control on his sparring. Like he doesn't go in there trying to light people up or anything.
Yeah, no. Sparring's supposed to be a tool to get better. And if you get injured, then we just went in a regression in our training. So when I walked into those places, like me and my cousin did our last full contact sparring when I was like 16. We were kind of hyped up, maybe 16, 15. We just watched The Matrix in the 90s. And we're like, "Hey, we're hyped up. We haven't sparred in a long time. It's been about a year or two. Let's spar." And when we were kids, we would spar with no gloves and stuff. But once we turned 16, we started wearing more gloves. And this is why. We went up, we did our sparring like we used to. Okay, we'll go light. And we kind of wore I think we wore like some motorcycle gloves to cover the knuckles. And I was
So
wearing,
they wouldn't bleed.
Yeah, and I was wearing like a big down jacket during the winter, and him too. And we fought, and we had a great time. Adrenaline rush. The next day, we're like, "Oh man, my neck. Oh, my shins from that low kick. Yeah, we probably shouldn't do that anymore. No, we probably shouldn't." So that was like the last time we did any type of heavy sparring. Then we started making different, and it was funny. We never walked into a dojo or a gym in our life. MMA did not exist back then, and if it did, it was all still underground. I remember watching VHS videos, being like, "What are those guys doing?"
Yeah, back in the day, you had to know a guy who knew a guy who
had the Ultimate Fighting Championship.
had VHS tape.
Yeah, he's like,
that
"You
he
want to see
copied
some?"
from another guy.
He's like, "You want to see some real fighting?" I remember it was a karate black belt that showed me that. But yeah, I didn't walk into my first Kajukenbo studio till I was well into 18. Did all the trial lessons, and Kajukenbo was the only place I walked in, and that did not work. I got through some of the lower ranks. They never complained about excessive contact while I was sparring. And when I got to the last guy, shout out to Mike, Sifu Mike. I forgot what his title is now. Maybe Psikan or whatever. But either way, we sparred, and I couldn't touch him. And my experience sparring with bigger guys is they're big, but they're slow. That's always been my experience with bigger guys. They're big, but
There are so many big guys who break that rule. Man.
Yes, and he was one of them. Because, he was actually a fighter. Again, at that point, I'm talking about experience of fighting that people that never trained. He trained.
Yeah, exactly.
And he mopped the floor with
It's
me.
a big misconception people have about big guys.
Yeah.
They're like, "Oh, big guys are slow."
No,
Well,
no.
fat people who don't train and don't exercise are slow. Professional athletes are fast. I mean, you watch football players doing an agility ladder. These guys weigh like 300 pounds, and their feet move faster than they move faster than Bruce Lee could ever hope to be. And yeah, the Bruce Lee fans are going to get mad about that. But watch the feet of these pro football players doing an agility ladder, then watch Bruce Lee punching. Ask yourself which one is faster.
Yeah.
There's no comparison.
Yeah. It's just comes down to training. And that's how I ended up getting into Kajukenbo. I'm like, these guys, they know what they're doing. And that's how I ended up getting in. But when I came in at that point, it was to avoid street fighting. I never got in a street fight. My instructor didn't want us, even though our art, you heard the story. At this point, we're almost finished up, but you heard the history. It was developed for street fighting. All our stuff has to do, every self-defense technique in the first 2 moves has some growing strike in it.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, avoid the street fight.
Yeah. You learn how to fight so you don't have to fight, basically.
Yeah. And I remember like this one guy, I'll try to do this story in less than a minute. Chief Running Mouth.
Okay.
Gotta talk about Chief Running Mouth real quick. A former Marine. Comes in, sees our training, says, "That looks good and all your sparring, but where's your knife stuff?" And my instructor was the same one. He's like, "I do knife stuff with the higher ranks, but we really don't like to do knife stuff." "Well, if you use a knife, this is how you use a knife." And started, "Can I come in and do a knife seminar? I'll show everyone how to use knives because I know how." All right, cool. So he came in. He ended up dropping one of our students on their head. Mind you, we didn't have mats. So he dropped her, mother of 2, on her head. And she had a giant welt.
This just gets worse and worse.
One of our purple belts, a giant welt. And after that, my instructor was like, "What are you doing?" You should... And then after like kind of epiphany, "Oh, whoops.
Oh man.
So Chief Running Mouth, long story short, maybe a year later, ended up getting arrested. He successfully defended himself on the streets against a guy wielding a knife. And he ended up throwing a brick at one of them, disarmed, stabbed the other guy, and ended up going in for, I believe it was second-degree murder.
Yeah.
Self-defense. He didn't get the self-defense plea.
Everybody keeps saying there's no rules on the streets, except they keep forgetting about the rule of law.
Yeah.
The rule of law is much more harsh than any foul you will get from a referee in a combat sport.
Yeah.
You kick somebody in the groin in an MMA fight. I mean, you're like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. You get a warning.
Yeah.
At worst.
At worst.
You do it and you make it look malicious and deliberate, you'll lose a point. You do something like that in the street, it's aggravated assault.
Yeah.
You can go to jail for that.
Not even hitting them in the groin.
Yeah.
Your first jab is aggravated assault.
Yeah.
Your follow-up into a ground and pound is attempted murder.
There you go.
If you're a grappler, if you end up getting them in a chokehold, that is attempted murder.
And in some states, even grabbing somebody by the wrist can be considered aggravated
That's
assault.
aggravated assault.
Yeah.
But attempted murder is not that far away.
Yeah.
And that's a huge thing to have on your. That's not a light thing. That's not a light sentence. That is not jail. That is butt pounding prison. Like there's no way around that.
Meanwhile, in the MMA cage, we're attempting murder constantly, and the only thing stopping it from happening is a referee intervening.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's something that if anybody watching or anybody who does MMA, like even as martial artists, something you gotta remind yourself.
Yeah.
If that's why I hate street fighting.
Yeah, exactly. At the same time, I'm not bringing that up to say like street fighting or MMA is better than street fighting.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. No. It's safer.
It's just
it's safer.
It's way safer.
Safer.
And you don't go to jail for it.
Yeah.
And on top of that, it's very important to recognize that MMA training in so many ways is too much and in some ways and too little in other ways to respond to a self-defense situation.
Yeah.
And at the same time, as self-defense type of training in some ways is too much and in most ways is too little to rise to the occasion of a cage fight.
Yeah. It's a really weird. I guess they're all kind of different sports. It's like football and rugby.
Yeah.
Right? They're both ball sports. But if you grab a rugby player and throw him in a football stadium, he's not going to be able to perform. Same as if you grab a football player and put him in a rugby stadium. He's not going to be able to perform.
Just different strategies, different sizes of opponents, different equipment. One is wearing armor, the other is not. I mean, rugby players, they're tough dudes, but they tend to be like half the size of American football players.
Yeah. Different set of rules.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have about 10 seconds left in this podcast. So Angelo, thank you so much for coming today. And I want to give you a shout out because you have a great, really underrated YouTube channel. You've got a podcast. And it makes me sad when I subscribe to you, and everybody else should too. I subscribe to you, and it makes me sad when I get the notifications for your podcast, and I look at it and it's
two
like
views,
like somewhere between 0 and 2 or 3 views. I'm like, come on, this is good stuff. This is quality information, high production value. So. Man, go give Angelo a listen. He's on YouTube.
Yeah. Social Jello with Angelo. You can Google it. All my stuff will come up.
Social Jello with Angelo.
Martial arts stuff on the playlist. Look up Kajukenbo series is where I'm doing all my martial arts stuff. It's all about Kajukenbo. If you go to the podcast, you'll have an array of different topics to check out. But if you're into the martial arts stuff, Kajukenbo, look up any of the Kajukenbo stuff. It's all there.
And I know at least 300 of you guys subscribing to my channel have asked me, what do I think of Kajukenbo? I know practically nothing about it other than what Angelo has told me. So go check out his channel. He'll tell you all about Kajukenbo. So anything else you want to say or shout outs you want to give?
Yeah, shout out to my instructor, Ronnie Sagiri. And shout out to David Taviras for the stuff in the book. And shout out to the Abad sisters who came from the Abad method. It's all Kajukenbo stuff that maybe none of you know, but if they watch this, they'll know.
Angelo, are you culturally appropriating the
I've
palm
just
fist salute?
appropriated the palm fist salute.
You
Think
know,
about that.
The history of this is really interesting because in Chinese culture, not very few people even remember this, but the open hand is symbolic of the master, and the fist is symbolic of a slave. So this
Wow.
is a slave-master relationship.
Don't you love those stories?
The slave is subservient to the master right there. But in modern usage, this means thank you.
Really? So like, we got like 2 seconds, real quick. In Kajukenbo, this means sheath. This means sword. We're putting away our swords and we're training. But
Interesting.
yeah,
But yeah, originally in Chinese culture, it was the servant is subservient to the master. It's basically saying I'm willing to serve you.
wow.
And so,
That's
for
pretty
example,
cool.
when a referee steps in a fight cage or a boxing ring to officiate, the first thing they do in China is they do the palm fist salute to the audience, and they do the palm fist salute to the judges and so on.
Serving the judges and serving the audience.
When fighters come in, they do the same thing. It's I'm here to serve you, as opposed to I'm the man. I'm in the spotlight. It's a totally different type of mentality, I think.
Yeah, I like it.
It also means thank you. So I have culturally appropriated that. I do that at the end of most of my videos where I say, thank you for watching. Now get out there and train.
All right.
All right.
I think that's your wrap.
I think we're done, and I need to go pick up my kids from school.
Cool.
Awesome, man. Thanks for being here, man.
No problem. Thanks for having me.